Okay, then I'm going to go through one of my pictures here, just the editing that I normally do. Um, Usually when I get questions from my website, it's usually about editing or camera gear, questions about cameras, that sort of thing. I went through all this. I made this video once already, and I messed up the audio. The microphone volume was too low. Anyway, so here we go again. If you haven't been to my website, it's thephotographyhobbyist.com. So thephotographyhobbyist.com. There's various gear, any camera that I've used, and these are cameras that I've actually owned, not just tried for a week and sent back. But there were probably two like that. The rest of these were longer term ownership and intended to actually own the camera and use it. But A6400 was one that I actually sent back and replaced with the XT30, and I'm much happier. So anyway, I've got a lot of gear galleries on there for any camera that I've actually owned, and some lenses and so on. And there's these are just the favorites that I added to the front page. But so there's all kinds of stuff in there. So you can browse around, visit that my website. So now back to this. I'm using Adobe Lightroom Classic CC. This is the the PC based, the computer based. It's available for Mac too, obviously. But it's the more computer centered editing rather than the cloud software. So this actually is like the old Lightroom, except for it's just they call it Classic CC now, and has all the features. The cloud-based version doesn't have as much. But I'll just go through what I normally do to edit a picture. This is from Glacier National Park in 2017. It was a Panasonic GH5 with an Olympus 12-100 f4. So if I go back and forth, you can see it was a 1/10 of a second at f5, ISO 100 on the Olympus 12-100. So this is the after, after I've already edited, and we'll just jump over to the picture that I started with. So this is just a virtual copy of the original file, the raw file. And this is all raw, so obviously you can edit the white balance any way you want to. So I don't really care what the white balance is in the camera. I just leave the camera set to auto white balance. So I'll just kind of start at the top here and go through what I usually do, and I just kind of eyeball it. I just edit it until I like it. Usually it takes a few minutes. It's going to take longer since I'm just talking about everything here, but I'll explain what I'm doing, and hopefully that'll help some people. That ask, I'll just kind of point them here. So usually I create presets like this scene here, like I've got a Panasonic GH5 preset. I just start with that. And the only thing that's just kind of a starting point. Obviously, you can see it didn't really do a whole lot. This image, I think it was kind of like mostly in the shade. It was earlier in the morning, and wasn't real bright out yet. So this area, by the way, is on that cedar trail. So the Glacier National Park in Montana in the United States, there's a area called the Cedar Trail. I can't remember if that's the exact name, but I think it is. It's just like this long wooden walkway, and it just kind of winds through these big cedar trees. And towards the back of it, before you loop around and start coming back, there's this area, and this is literally like right off the walkway. There's this little bridge that goes across it, obviously, and there's a wooden railing there. And I just kind of knelt down and stuck my camera through that railing and took a picture. It was not a tripod shot. And that's typically what I do, when I'm out shooting and vacation. This was just a typical vacation photo. So you can see right now it looks pretty dull. My preset did apply some things. This was a couple years ago. I probably would have had the presets set a little bit different if I did it today. But all I was really doing is I just take a basic image that's not like an extreme of one end to the other, not like a, really bunch of, bright highlights and dark shadows. It's just kind of a, image that's kind of flat, really. It's not extreme contrast one way or the other. So I just kind of adjust the contrast, the highlights, shadows, saturation and vibrance and sharpening. I just kind of start with basic stuff like that. So this one, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to leave it on camera natural. It's just the camera matching profile. So in Lightroom, you have these are favorites I've saved. So these are the Adobe Raw defaults. That's Adobe Color, That's Adobe Landscape. That looks better than the original, so a little bit darker but more colorful in contrast. So you can go through, and Adobe usually works with the camera manufacturer, I assume, and they have like these profiles that kind of try to match the profiles in the camera, like, you know, natural, portrait, standard, scenery, which is like landscape, vivid. So I usually just start with something kind of, you know, natural or standard, whatever, something like that. So I see this is a little too dark, so I'll just go ahead and, you know, I hover my mouse over the exposure. You know, you see it kind of light up a little bit there when I hover over it. I'm not clicking it, just hovering on it, and I'll press the up arrow and go up to about just a little over half a stop. So again, I don't normally, you know, really crank up the exposure on any pictures I do. It's not really, you know, common that I would go more than a stop, you know, up or down on, you know, when I'm editing pictures. So contrast, actually, you need to go up, not down on that. So I'm just hovering the mouse over the contrast slider and then hitting the up arrow. You know, maybe 35 probably is fine for now. Highlights, I don't have a lot of highlights, so I'm just going to take that back to 0. Shadows, probably am going to boost that up a little bit, but I do want shadows. You know, I want it to look natural. You know, I don't want it to look like a crazy HDR picture. This is Micro Four Thirds file, so you can't really beat those up too hard anyway. So whites, I definitely need to bring that up, liven things up a little bit. So that's probably about where I'd want to stop right now, because I can see this moss is, you know, the yellow parts here are getting a little blown, or a little too bright anyway. It's trying to be a little distracting. I can maybe take the highlights down a little bit. I usually actually start with highlights at minus 15 or 20 when I start editing anyway. Blacks, it's almost like it's the black point, and I guess this is the white point, so the whites and the blacks. So the blacks are like the really deep, darkest areas, and the whites would be the brightest areas. So I'm just going to actually take that back down. I'll just put it at 0. That'd probably be fine. Texture is a newer slider that wasn't available when this picture was taken, so it was 2017. So the texture slider in Lightroom was one of the later things they added. So it adds a little more contrast, and, or, well, actually makes things look a little more sharp. Anything that has texture, it kind of, you know, builds on that and just makes it look a little sharper. I don't normally use clarity too much, because I find if the clarity slider, if you have, let's say there was everything in the background was blurred out, really nice, pretty creamy bokeh, you know, a blurred background. And if you start cranking up the clarity, so if you see, like, I'll go ahead and crank it up here. You see it just kind of darkens everything and makes everything look really just too much contrast. So and that kind of messes up your bokeh in the background too. It kind of starts darkening it up, and I don't like it. So I don't normally use contrast unless, you know, it's like a cityscape or something like that I think would probably be, you know, more beneficial to use it. Dehaze is kind of mostly for skies, to, you know, get the haze out of the sky, but actually you can kind of darken things up. Just, it's actually, if you use it on a picture like this, to me, it's more of a, you know, it kind of adds a little bit of contrast without going too far and, you know, getting crazy. So you can just kind of bump that up a little bit. I think that looks all right. Actually, the white balance, I need to do something with that. I think we need to make that a little more colorful here. So we're going to go up a little there. The tint, I need to probably, that's probably fine. Just go up 1 on the tint. So by the way, if you double click these sliders, whoops, it takes it back to whatever it was set to in the camera when you imported it. So it's plus 29. So if I change it, all I have to do is double click it. It'll take it back where it was. Or in this case, like contrast, it'll set it back to 0. And then when you up arrow, down arrow, it goes up plus and minus 5 each time. So I'll take the, whoops, so set the tint just up 1 to be fine. I think I want to go a little more with the warmth on the white balance. Okay, so I want to go a little bit more in the exposure, but I don't know, we'll see. That's why I'm saying that, you know, that there's no real secret or anything to this. I just kind of play around with it until I like it. Vibrance, I usually I usually start around 10 and 15. 15 on the vibrance, 10 on the saturation. Depends on the camera profile that you choose. The different profiles, have more saturation anyway. So like Adobe Landscape, see now with the editing I've already done, I wouldn't want to do that now. It just looks crazy. So that's not too bad there. I'm just going to take the highlights down just a little. Well, I think it's probably right there. Maybe up a little bit on the shadows. Excuse me. And I might go up one more with the whites. And clarity, I might just give it one bump, and that's about it. And probably want to have a little vignette. I usually do a post-crop vignette. Actually, we'll go on down. We'll go down to the sharpening first. Sharpening, what I usually do these days, I have sharpening at 35 on a detail, radius 0.8. Masking is, well, we'll talk about the masking here. This is really useful. So again, let's say you had just this front part of the picture in focus, and that's really the only thing you'd want to sharpen. You wouldn't want to sharpen your bokeh in the background if it was like a really nice, creamy, blurred out background, which is not this case, but just pretend that it was. So if you hold down on the Windows computer, if you hold down Alt, and then you left click on the masking slider in the sharpening area, anything that's white will be sharpened. Anything that's black will not be sharpened. So if you've got nice creamy water there that's flowing, why would you want to sharpen that? So I just take it over until everything that I think would really need to be sharpened. It depends on the scene. In this case, there's a lot in focus, so there's going to be a lot showing up that would probably be sharpened anyway. Deep depth of field, so I'm at 87 there, so I'll just release. Again, everything you see in white will be sharpened and black will not. So we'll go with that. And then the Micro Four Thirds file, I usually don't sharpen those too much because you can't beat them up too much, and it just looks a little unnatural if you go too far into sharpening anyway. But my Nikon Z7 files, I usually just same thing with the radius and detail, adjust the masking as needed based on the photo, and the amount I would normally do anywhere from 60 to 70, and that probably wouldn't go any further, like on those. But I may go with 60 on this one. Again, this is a Panasonic GH5. Down here on the lens corrections, if I can get it to stop there. Lens corrections, most of the cameras these days have the lens profile built into the raw file. So if you see here where it says built-in lens profile applied, you don't really have to manually select a profile down here. So if you did need to, like on an older camera, you could enable profile corrections, and select the the make of the lens and that sort of thing. Make of the lens, a model lens, and that whatever. So then I usually leave that as is, just remove chromatic aberrations. So I just leave that on by, I think I have that checked in my preset, turns that on. Or it might be on by default in Lightroom, I'm not sure, but I mean, there's no reason not to have it enabled. If you did need to select some fringing that was on the edges of something, you just come over here. I usually leave this selected on the manual side, so when I'm scrolling down, I can just easily click the little dropper here, and then come over and click wherever there might be some fringing, but there's really nothing like that in this picture. So you click it again to get rid of it, put it back. The transform, if you had like some buildings and so on, and maybe you didn't have your everything straight, or the perspective looks a little weird because if it's a wide angle lens, and if you had enough room to crop, you could use that to kind of straighten things out and make it look better as far as the perspective, horizontal, vertical, and whether the building's kind of slanted or not. And for the post-crop vignette, like I said, I do normally add a little vignette to everything, even if, unless it's something like a sky or whatever, but it just depends. A lot of times I'll start with light, which is -10. So this one, I think I had went with medium before, maybe a little bit more. So if I, again, just hover the mouse over it and down arrow. Yeah, I think I actually need to bump this up, come back up, maybe just up on the exposure just a little bit, and maybe up a little bit on the whites. So you can also kind of do the same thing with the white, right here with the whites and the blacks. If you scroll down under the tone curve area, you can also, go up and down on the lights and darks here. It's sometimes a little more subtle and less prone to blowing things out if you use the tone curve, I think. But that's kind of the way I do it, and I think I might kind of stop with that. I think that's pretty close to where I left it before. So let's go back to the original. I think my original is right there, and this is the edited version that I did just now. So you can see, see how much you can get done in just a short time. And again, this is not really magic or anything. It's just I've been using Lightroom since version 1. It just takes a little while to get used to it. And when my picture started improving a lot was when I used RAW files rather than just shooting JPEG. I mean, it's much more you can do with the pictures in RAW, and highlight recovery and lifting the shadows, and for me, one of the biggest things is being able to adjust the white balance much easier, because it's just so easy to tweak the white balance little by little until it's the way you want it, or correct. I mean, it could be either correct or it could be the way you want it. I mean, this is probably more like the way I want it rather than technically correct, but I think it looks better than real life if it was a little more subdued in real life. But it was pretty vibrant there. So I did need to do some editing to this picture for sure. So you saw what it started out with, and now it's much better. So if I just make another virtual copy of that, I don't know if it's gonna, there we go. Which one is this? Is this the third one? Copy 2, copy 2, what is that? Copy 2, copy 3. So I just take one of these virtual copies, and actually right here I can just click reset, and that'll take it back to the total default. So now you can see it's actually a 4/3 file. It's in the 4/3 aspect ratio. Even in the GH5, which is Micro Four Thirds, I usually shoot in a 3:2 aspect ratio. Which, nice thing about 4/3 sensors is if you go to the crop tool here, in the newer 4/3 cameras, you have this extra space above and below. So if you shoot in 3:2, you still have the original 4:3 file that you can work with. So if you wanted to drag it up or down a little bit, it's kind of like got some hidden part of the file there, access to that. So that's nice. So if you got your, if there was something right on the edge and you're like, ah, crap, I should have framed it a little bit further up, so that you can just go into the crop mode and bring it up a little bit. That's just the Micro Four Thirds sensor though. So anyway, I think I'll just stop with that. Actually, let's go, did I export that other, let's go, which one was I editing? This one. So I've got some export presets, so 1600 pixels wide. Let's see, use unique name. And the other thing I was going to say is I like using Nikon View as my image viewer. Like after I've done the editing, I just export the files. You can also use this for Nikon files, like Nikon RAW files. You can do a little mild editing inside of the Nikon View NXI. But what I'd like to use it for, because I haven't found any other simple photo viewer that does exactly what I want. So I've basically got my thumbnails here, and I can just click on one, and it brings it up in the full screen, and I can just right arrow, left arrow. So this was, let's see, this was the original, and the other one I tweaked a little bit on the crop. So there's the one I just edited. So these XT30 files I was playing around with the other day. Yeah, so I can just left and right arrow go through these pictures, and you can also, it won't zoom in on these because these are as big as they're going to be displayed. But if you just hold down the shift key, it zooms into 100%. So that's another nice thing I like about it. And when I'm done viewing them in full screen, just hit escape. And now it's back to the thumbnails again. So anyway, that's the basic edit that I do in Lightroom on a picture that I would import as a RAW file. And again, this is just kind of more for the people that maybe don't know it as well, or they had might have been some things that I did in here that they might have picked up on that they didn't know before. And then, like I said, I get a lot of people that had asked questions about how do I edit my pictures, or because they like how they look. So that I just run through one of those, and as you can see, there's really not much to it once you start getting familiar with the settings over here with the exposure, contrast, and just all the basic stuff. I mean, there's really not much to do to them. I mean, it's pretty simple and easy. So that's it, and thanks for watching.